Hi, everybody. We are live today for our, again, I'm not keeping track of the numbers anymore,
Past
like
that.
episode meeting of the Coffee Klatch. And I'm sitting outside today because it's nice out and it's quieter in here than it is in my house. Not quiet out here because I can hear like work trucks off in the distance and wind
Bird.
chimes and barking dogs and things like that. Hi, April. So yeah, it's definitely its own kind of noisy, but it's not the sound of children angrily doing school. So it's quieter than it is in there. Believe me. So today we are going to talk about writing, and I'm very like I tried to turn my email noise off, by the way, and it didn't work. So here we are. There is going to be email noise through this video. So Yeah, today we're talking about writing. And so, any questions that you have for us about writing or kind of adjacent topic, go ahead and like kind of sprinkle them in throughout the video. We're going to be looking at them. And we're just going to kind of start by talking about like our own personal writing journeys, like why we write, how we got here, like how we got published, and all that kind of stuff. And today I am drinking out of my poison apple mug, which felt somehow. It's one of
On the
my
other
many
hand,
Disney mugs.
mine just has an N on it because all of my writing themed ones were in the dishwasher.
They're both kind of nice little round mugs.
Yeah.
Mm. All right, so Nicole, why are you a writer?
Sorry, that's a weird question. Um,
It's a great question.
I don't know. um, no, I've always written. I can't remember a time I didn't write stories or stuff like that. And so I will say that growing up writing stories and the like of poetry and whatnot, I did not think that I would ever actually become a published author because especially when I was younger, that seemed like something you had to know how to do and like a magical process far removed from my life. So that was very much just for me in the beginning. And then, thanks to the internet, sort of figured out that you could actually become a published author. And that writing has always been one of my favorite things to do. So I figured I should try to get a job doing one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, I think I'm very similar in that from the time that I could write, I always did it. Like that when we would do like creative writing in school or whatever, it was always my favorite thing. And I remember distinctly learning how to use dialogue and like being very, very excited to know the rules for how to write that, because I remember like writing stories and being like, oh, now I can like write conversations. It doesn't have to just be telling what people are doing. And like, so really from the time I was in like first grade, probably I was like, I love this and kind of all of that. And was really into it, but kind of had the exact same thought you did, like, but who actually gets to grow up to do that?
It feels
And
very separate from real life.
totally. And we were really lucky at my school. We did have like authors come in and talk to us sometimes. And those are people I remember and like things that I remember, that we had like these published authors come talk to us when I was in elementary school, and like they were real people. So like on some level I knew that there were like real people who were doing it. But still, like I just didn't really think that that could be me, And then but I still wrote all the time. And kind of never finished anything.
Yes, that was my exact same thing. I just thought, I remember specifically, I decided when I was 13, I was going to write a novel, not just like the short stories and poetry and stuff that I'd been doing. And I did not finish a novel till I was 20. So that was a good 7 years of starting and never finishing anything. And I started like probably 50 different books,
Yep.
got to varying spots, but I would never make it past the middle.
That's actually a scarily similar timeline to me. I remember I had a big notebook, like a spiral bound notebook that was really, really thick. And I thought I will write a novel out of this. And I was probably 13 or 14. And then I was 20, I think I was 21 when I finished my first book that I actually finished. And for me, I think the catalyst to actually finishing something was really keying into what I wanted to, like, if you hear scampering, it's a Labradoodle, pardon him. He may bark at things. But anyway, don't be alarmed. It's not like a rodent of unusual size. So yeah, I think I was always kind of writing what I was reading at the time. Like little bit, like, I was reading like adventure stories. So it would be like, I would write, a girl in a plane crash, but there would be a cute boy with her and they would survive. It was like Hatchet, but with a hot guy and a girl. And like, so it was like whatever I was reading at the time. Or like, I read a lot of like YA middle grade suspense books. Like somebody was always getting kidnapped or whatever. And so I would write a lot of that. And then as I got older, like I was really into Lord of the Rings. So I was like, I did a little bit of like dabbled in like fantasy and like magical kind of stuff. And it really wasn't until I started reading romance that I was like, oh, like, yeah, I think this is what I want to write. And that actually gave me like some direction in terms of how to finish.
Yeah, I think all good writing efforts start with those that copying the thing that you're enjoying. I before I wrote anything, like when I was writing short stories, mine were very Sweet Valley High oriented because that's what I loved to read. So it was basically like, you're kind of copying the storylines, but putting your own characters into them. And that's like, I think a very common first step
Definitely
for writers. For me, the thing that got me to finish was partially finding romance. I had probably been reading it. I actually don't know what year I started reading it, but it was in college, which is also when I finished my first novel. So it was around the same time. But also, I was involved in a lot of online writing, like message boards or websites. And one of them talked about National Novel Writing Month. So this was back in like the early 2000s before it was like, now it's like a whole like message boards and you can have like and stuff like that. Back then it was nothing except you like read what the challenge was and you could like print off a certificate at the end. Like there was no interaction whatsoever. It was just a challenge. To write, which if you don't know what National Novel Writing Month is, the challenge is in the month of November to write a 50,000 word complete novel. And so to have that like specific word count and day count was like the thing that made it click for me. Weirdly, like having that structure was like, okay, I can't stop because I have to get it done by this certain time and I have to get it done in this certain amount of days. So that was the first time I ever finished writing a complete novel, was with that challenge in mind.
So for me, it's like my finishing a book, which this is actually very me in a, hi Bentley. My dog came over to say hi. You can't see him because he's down here. Anyway, oh, there he is. Bentley, say hi. Okay, now go away. Go. Anyway, I like how like this is actually the first time I've been interrupted during one of these videos, and it's like supposed to be the professional one. So I actually have a dog in my face.
Right.
That is actually a fantastic metaphor. No, so again, like very, like this is probably the most me writing thing of all time. Like I started reading romance. I started reading presents. I started looking up more things kind of about Harlequin because I was looking for the books, and then I saw that they had like a lot of really good information on how to get published. And then they did a contest called Instant Seduction. That was for, and this was before they did lots of pitches on everything. This was on the website iHeart Presents. So they did a contest called Instant Seduction, and you had to like wow the editors with one chapter basically. And so what I did was they linked to like the Presents guidelines and things. So very similarly to your experience with Nano, what I had suddenly was a structure. Like, so not only had I been reading a lot of Presents and I knew that I liked them a lot as a reader, there were then these guidelines. That's got word count. It's got what they want the focus of the story to be. You need the hero and heroine to end up together. It's got a particular kind of heat level. Like there were just a lot of signposts, but it's like, I didn't finish a book until I had a place to submit it, which is honestly, like I said, like it's a very me thing. I was like, oh, there's a thing to do with it. So now I feel motivated. So I wrote that one chapter. And while I was waiting for them to judge the contest, because I think it was like, there was like 3 weeks or whatever between like when I submitted and when they actually judged the contest, or maybe even a month. I started writing what would have been like the sequel to that book, because I was like, well, I'll see what happens. I'll see what happens. But I'm going to go ahead and start something else, because I know you have to have a full to submit, and I'm a rule follower. So I was like, you have to have the whole thing written so you can submit the partial. And so by the time the contest, kind of closed, and I had gotten my little email that said, thanks, but no thanks, generic. We don't think this has enough conflict to sustain a book. Like, I got like a form rejection from the contest. I had written like half of Another Presents. And I was like, well, might as well finish it, because I'm halfway through. Like, the other thing was only 10 pages, and this is, now I'm at like 100 pages and like should keep going. And so, so then that's the book I actually finished and ended up ultimately submitting.
Yeah, and those contests, and that's so I actually wrote for quite a few years without submitting anything. I couldn't tell you why, except I didn't, again, like the internet was sort of in its infancy in my college days, and like there was no Google. I couldn't just go to Google and be like, how do you submit a book?
Could have asked
like,
Jeeves.
Right. I'm sure I did when that was an option.
Yeah.
But, you had to go through all these, like you had to get like the writer's guide, like the big book, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't really know to go where to go for the answers. So I started submitting in 2008, I want to say. So like a good like 6 or 7 years after I'd been writing novels. So when I started submitting, I was not submitting the first book I ever wrote. Thank God, because it was awful.
But it was pretty terrible. It has to be said. It went through a lot of changes before it became my first published book.
And Harlequin still to this day, but back in the day, definitely ran a lot of different contests. Yeah. I entered or had pitch openings or whatever, and they still do that. I guess I don't know all the places that So You Think You Can Write. I think they post it on there.
Yeah, and the Facebook group, the Harlequin Writing Connection.
And they're on Submittable too a lot if they're.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Like the new Love Inspired ones were on Submittable.
Oh, okay.
If it's more of just a call for entries, I think it's probably, I don't know. Anyway, but Harlequin is probably one of the best publishers in terms of just having their guidelines and like letting you know what they want, because they have all of these different areas.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I mean, that's obviously how I got published, so I completely agree with that.
And to me, like, when I decided to start getting published, the Harlequin submission guidelines were the ones that made the most sense, and they had all of these contests where you didn't have to. This was still in the time where most of the time you had to mail in a physical copy of your book. And I lost my teaching job. I got laid off in 2009, 2010. I don't know, but I didn't feel comfortable spending a lot of money sending stuff off. So like I was always looking for the online option.
And this actually, I just want to pause right there and say, I think that is something that you and I both have in common, is that we did not have the ability to spend a whole lot of money on investing and getting published. So I think I like to pause there just to say, like, first of all, even if self-publishing had existed in the way that it is now, I couldn't have done it.
I couldn't have
absolutely would not have been an option for me. I couldn't have afforded, like, because so often people go, oh, well, I don't spend any money except, the editor, the formatter, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly this, like, calculator amount, like, money is, like, running up a tab. And I'm like, I felt really guilty. I had to mail my manuscripts to England. And so I felt really bad just doing that. Like, that was, and, like, that I would go write at Starbucks because it was the only, like, Annabeth says, I remember mailing manuscripts, postage did add up, and it really did. Like, and I was sending them overseas. And so I was really relieved when my editor started working with me over email, actually. And she did before I sold. So I only had to mail one full. But that was, yeah, it's like even buying like my coffee at Starbucks, because that's where I would write for the couple hours that I had to write. Like I felt bad about it. Like it felt weird. And so, and I say that because like I wasn't a member of any writing organization. I didn't spend any money. I didn't pay for editors to look at my work. I didn't pay for a critique. I didn't pay for, like, I feel like there's so many people that ask for your money. And like, I am so dead set, like down on that, because
Yeah,
I couldn't have done it. And I feel like people can be very dismissive of like when you say you don't have money to spend on something, like sometimes that doesn't mean, well, yeah, except $300 for a form. Like that means nothing. And that was the position that I was in. So anyway, go on about
that's a really good point, because I think a lot of us, I think a lot of people have the idea. I didn't really know anything about the writing industry,
same.
but I feel like there is definitely some, like, especially in non-genre, that you kind of have to have money to get started, or you have to invest money,
or have connections, or
and there's such this, like, I think especially with self-publishing, that you have to invest in yourself, and you have to spend money to make money, and that was not an option for me and my family at all.
Yeah, you don't have money to spend, you can't. So
yeah, and that's okay. Like, you can still absolutely find a publishing path that does not involve you investing a ton of money at all.
Yeah,
in fact, like none.
I am actually still an extremely low investor of resources, if not a zero investor of resources, which, understanding that I am in a good like position with a publisher, but just that I've never been a big spender on, and that's because of kind of the mindset that I come out of, and like the position that I was in when I started, and so I've always seen it as, well, they're buying a book from me, and like they should spend money on it, not me. And that's still how I am. So I'm like, that's my job. You pay me. So, and that's kind of a side note, but it is just that, like, actually being, I think so often, like, they'll ask you about like how you got published, and then like feel like, oh, but you must have had a connection, or, oh, you must have like your MFA and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, I'm straight out of the trailer. Like, I don't have like, I don't got no fancy degree. I've got a dental assisting certificate that I never used.
Yeah, and absolutely no connections whatsoever.
Yeah,
like I started this completely cold, like nothing.
Yeah, completely. Like, you and I are both very, very far removed from elite publishing circles.
Yes. So I guess the point there is that you can start at like zero.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to know people. You don't have to make connections. Like, especially in genre romance fiction, like, you can do it.
Yeah, like most especially in like, because I think there are parts of publishing where like a platform and a personality benefit. And as I see this a lot too, I see a lot of authors worrying about platform before they've ever finished anything. And it's like, genre fiction is not the place to worry about your platform. And like, people will be not in agreement with me on that, but that's just kind of how I feel. Like, the stories have to come first. If you don't have stories, there's no point like investing in any of that. And like, I get it. I feel like in nonfiction, when you're writing things that are like very topical and like you need to kind of back it up with expertise, like that can be beneficial. But like, to be honest, I have not seen media on that scale benefit people in genre. Because our readers are primarily not looking for like our readers are looking for the story that they're looking for, and they kind of really know what they like to read. Like, there's a big difference too between like romance readers, which like you all here, I assume, are, if you're watching our video, who really already know what they like. They know what they're looking for. They read a lot. So they're very, very connected to like what books are out there. And people who are kind of casual readers who get their reading recommendations from media, which I feel like is not really the romance writer. So like, to me, it's like, as a romance writer, my concern first is the story, is my point to saying that. Like, it is to the writing, and that like your energy should always go to that first.
So, Yeah, and Harlequin still to this day has a lot of options, and that was sort of my foray into getting published. And I didn't publish with Harlequin first, but that they were the first publisher that I tried to publish with. And like, if there was an open call, if there was I can't even remember what they were called, but you could submit like a couple chapters, and they'd have feedback for you, or they'd get it within a certain amount of time. So like, I submitted to medical. I submitted to special edition. I submitted to romance. Like if there was a call, I would write a proposal for it. Because I really, to me, like I understood those guidelines. And so that's why I submitted so much to Harlequin. In the end, when Harlequin would, reject those, and I'd usually written a full by the time they did, I would then submit to like, online for like digital first publishers because you didn't have to do any snail mail. So that's why like my first couple publishers were, the digital only, um, publishers, but that was like a good learning. It was not a good sales experience. It was a good learning experience. Um, and like that was that submission process, whether it was rejection or acceptance, was like what motivated me to keep going. Because like it was a concrete goal. Like I'm going to submit this story to XYZ publishers or agents or whatever. And so there was always something concrete to finish for. And having that end goal helped me write a lot. In those years where I wasn't published, I was getting just rejected.
Yeah. I think like this is a great, like, people will ask me kind of, I guess it's almost like, how did I end up where I am, which is just like being kind of a, like, and you and I are both like this, like a very prolific authors. And I was like, honestly, like youth and ignorance. I didn't know how long it was supposed to take to write a book.
Yeah.
I didn't know how anybody else did it. I didn't know, that you could like go on. And again, this also comes down to not having financial resources. Like I remember actually very early, stepping on toes here, but whatever. I'm like, this is a very honest conversation. We're just having coffee, guys. But I remember very early in my career, and this was when I had sold, people being like, oh, well, I just need to go refill the well. And I was like, I have like 3 babies. Where am I going to go? Like, what well am I refilling? Writing is refilling my well. That's not doing dishes. It's not changing diapers. It's not having to be like, mom. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and I was like, and where am I going to go? Like, you guys are talking about like going on retreats and all this kind of stuff, and I don't have any money.
Yeah.
So it's like,
thinking, but in the shower today, that like the thing that most motivated me to write was having something else I should do that I didn't want to do.
yeah,
Like,
for sure.
even before I was published or trying to get published, like I remember in college when I did NaNoWriMo, I was supposed to be writing my 25-page research paper for my history class. But it was way more fun to go pretend to be other people than it was to research teachers in the Old West. So like I ended up writing that research paper in like a day, like before it was due, because I had spent all my time procrastinating with my book. And to this day, I don't want to wash the dishes. I don't want to do laundry. Oh, I have a book to write, so I'm going to go write my book. Like
exactly. It is an ironclad excuse. But I was going to say, and look, you don't write research papers, do you? You write novels. So,
exactly.
I mean,
I got a B on it anyway. It was fine.
Why am I not surprised by that? But no, it's like like that was kind of my thing. It was like, well, like being in the particular place I was in many ways was like such a, like it was a blessing really, because it was like, I don't know another thing to do with my time. I don't know another like way to be. Like this is the only vacation I can have. Like leisure time was not really on offer. So it was like, if I could go like, it's that thing where you're like, my husband at the time was working like 2 jobs, neither of which he cared for. And I was staying home with kids. And it was like, well, if I was going to be then like taking up a bunch of time, I felt like, and he, like, I'm not saying that he required this, but it's like, I felt like there had to be a reason. Mm-hmm. If I wasn't home, like doing something to contribute because I wasn't contributing financially and we were really struggling, it was like, well, I better be doing something. And so it felt productive to me and it felt like something I was investing in. And so even when I wasn't actually earning a living from it, like that was a fantastic motivator. Like it was something I was working toward. And also, again, not doing dishes.
Yeah, I mean, the same for me, because so I got laid off from my teaching job and I could not get another one, aside from like a couple long-term subbing things. And then I got pregnant with my second kid, and it was like, I know we can't afford childcare on any like minimum wage job I could get. So like I might as well stay home until they're both in school, and we scrimp and we save. So it was like I knew like I basically had 5 years from when my youngest was born to make this a viable career option. And I've had a lot of terrible jobs that I hated. So why not spend that time doing everything I could to build an author career, like a writing career, whatever that was. So
And actually, so we do have some questions, but I'm going to use this as a bridge to April's question, which she left yesterday, which was basically like, I was going to look for it to read it, but my iPad is locking me out. It was, come on, man. Where you at? There it is. Basically, how do you stay motivated to write? And she was saying she hasn't touched her projects in almost a year due to emotional and creative kind of issues. And I think everything we've just been talking about is a fantastic explanation of how we stay motivated. And I think one way to kind of distill that is sometimes it's about knowing your broader goal. At least it is for me. Because like I said, when did I finish a book? When I had a place to send it. Like when I knew what to do with it. That's when I finished a book. So for me, so much of it is about knowing what happens next. And so then on a daily level, no matter what I feel, I know that ultimately what I want is out here somewhere. And if I don't take the steps to make that happen, no matter what's going on kind of in the moment, then I'm not going to have the thing out here. So for me, really concrete and honest long-term goals are very important. Like quite apart from the fact that like obviously I have deadlines and things like that, but when we're talking about someone who does not have those things yet or who isn't like, and like being perfectly honest with you, like perfectly honest, sometimes I just want to check. That's how I get my book finished, because when I turn it in and my editor reads it and I do revisions, they are going to pay me money. And sometimes I just need to pay my bills. So it's like those are great motivations when you have contracts, but you do have to find ways to motivate yourself when you don't. And so what I would say is that for me, you know, it is that kind of knowing, you know, well, okay, so like today, I don't want to do this, but like in the long term, I want to see my book on a shelf. I want to be published. I want to be famous. I want to be like, whatever your motivation is, that's fine. And I think particularly women are trained to be to really downplay what we want. And I think actually in writing too, because I think we're supposed to be like, well, I just love books and I'm in it for the art and all this kind of stuff. And those things are great, but like my kids can't eat art. So like, I think it's okay for your motivation to be also practical. And I think sometimes that gets beaten out of us. It's like, you're not allowed to say, well, I want to be successful. And like, if you do, that's fine.
It's like writing is an art. It is, but
absolutely.
But actually finishing something, finishing a book, like if you don't have a concrete motivator for that, you can put it off when you have bad things happen in your life, because it doesn't really matter. If your goal is simply to finish a novel someday, well, someday feels like any day. So it's really easy to put stuff off. You kind of have to find a more concrete goal than just someday I want to finish a book. Whether it's like some people use like their age, I want to finish a book by this year or whatever. Like you have to make the goal more concrete. And like maybe I think it's hard for us because me and Mace are the same. Like we're very goal oriented people. Like once we have a goal, like we are going to do whatever it takes to get there.
I was going to say, to be fair, there's not a lot of diversity of opinion in this video in terms of like.
That might not work for you. Maybe there's another way that works for you.
Yeah.
But like from our perspective and our experience, like having that concrete goal, knowing that I had to do X, Y, Z in this short period of time, like that was very motivating for me. And I was like, before I had kids, before I had a husband, before I had like a reason to need a different job, like I did not have a lot of motivation. I wasted a lot of time.
At a bug.
I didn't have to get anything. I didn't have a concrete goal. It was just like, oh, I'd maybe someday like to be published because I like writing. But the more airy-fairy that goal is, the harder it is to stick to.
Absolutely.
Things are hard, and things will be hard. Like life is hard. Yeah. Things happen. Like that's absolutely going to happen and it's going to feel bad. But the more concrete your goal is, the more that's the thing you can hold on to, even when stuff around you is uncontrollable or sad or hard.
One thing that, so we've actually taught a workshop called When Life in Publishing Knock You Down with Jackie and with Megan. And one of the things that we talked about, and I'm not going to tell, Megan's whole story here because that's hers, but one of the things that she said was that when she was going through like some really hard things, she kind of thought, but I would really like to have books on the other side of this. And she said, when you're in a space that is very, very dark and you can't love anything, like, so you're not going to love the book, but you're not going to love anything else either. Like, you might as well write, because at least when you come out of it, there will be books on the other side of it. And that is something that like resonates with me and is very true, like for me. And when I've gone through things like in my own life, like with my mom or with my kids, like my mom has had some health stuff and all that. So it's like going through that, it's like sometimes I can't connect to the book, but that's actually, it has nothing to do with the book. That's about me, and that's about where I'm at in my life. So regardless of what I'm doing, that's going to be the emotional space I'm in. And so sometimes just knowing that on the other side of it, I want to have accomplished this is enough to keep me going.
Yeah, you're not gonna. I think sometimes people think motivation is loving the thing you're writing all the time or feeling good about the thing you're writing all the time, and it's not. Like sometimes you're gonna hate what you're writing, and it's like that old Nora Roberts adage: you can't fix a blank page. Like so, if you never write it, there's nothing you can do about it. But if
Exactly.
you write it, even if it feels terrible and you think it's terrible and everything, like you can either A, fix it, or more likely you're going to come like when you're in a better spot mentally and emotionally, you're going to realize that it wasn't as bad as it felt in the moment.
I think one really potent lesson as a prolific author, because I often think about this, and this is not like denigrating the way anyone else does it, but you often think about like how people do things differently than you. And I've thought like, if you took 6 months to a year to write a book, you would have a variety of feelings while writing that book. Whereas sometimes I have to write a book, if I'm writing a book in a very contracted amount of time, sometimes it's like through one mood.
Yeah.
So literally, like you can spend an entire book, and all of your feelings about the book are actually about your life. And I think you're so much more connected to that in some ways when you write quickly, because then you're like, oh, I love this book. And then you realize it's actually because like the sun is shining for the first time in 6 months. And like, so you actually like are a happier person today. And it's not really about the book. So that's another thing I've learned is that like I might have really grim feelings about a book, but if I stop and like look around, I'm like, yeah, but I was like really stressed about this thing over here.
I also think one of the things that I think for me, one of the reasons I never finished, well, two reasons before I decided to finish, was first, if you're always getting to the middle and you always are bored and you start over, it's because you don't have enough conflict. That is like 99.9%
Yeah.
the reason. But also, if you find yourself writing and you are just like overwhelmed by indecision, because there are infinite ways to write a story. So
Yeah.
there's always like a million decisions that you can make in writing a story. And I think a lot of people get bogged down trying to make the right decision, but it's fiction, especially romance fiction. There is no right decision. It's just about the characters and the emotions. So if you find yourself unmotivated because you don't know where the story is going, like you just have to pick away and not worry that it's the wrong way or the right way. Like you just have to pick away and keep picking at it. Because if you let yourself take the time to try to work out what's the best choice, you are just always going to be like in that place of indecision. And it's just, that's very hard to be motivated through. So you kind of just have to like, even if you just pick a decision out of a hat, it doesn't matter because it's still going to be a story that you can fix in editing or revision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like that's something that I tell myself too is that like when I come to a place where I'm like bogged down in that decision making, I just kind of go, well, I can make the different decision next time. Cause like we all have, we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday. Like there's certain things that we all gravitate to and like write kind of more often than we write other things. So like, I'm like, well, next time I write a Friends to Lovers book, I'll do it this way. And this one is like this. And that's just how it is. So, like I'll try it and I'll see how it goes. And like, I've never gone back and changed my mind. So
Yeah.
those are just, and like, that's the benefit of experience too. Cause what I can tell you is that like writing is one of those things, like you learn the best by doing it. You learn the absolute best teacher. If I was going to tell anyone like if you have a finite amount of time and energy, the best thing that you can do is read a lot in the genre that you want to write in and write.
Yeah.
And practice finishing. And that's like you just said, because what you need to learn is your particular quirks. And only by writing a book from beginning to end do you really begin to understand that. Because one thing that I've seen a lot of is people get very involved in contests and all these kinds of pitch opportunities that like publishers like Harlequin do, and like where the contest will want the first 3 chapters. And so people will spend ages writing 3 chapters, polishing it up. They never write a full. But one thing that you have to remember is that, like, in this age of instant gratification, publishing and writing as a craft and as a career is a long tail pursuit. It's not meant to be instantaneous, and like it never will be. And like, quite frankly, like people who, there's a whole turkey situation happening over here. There's goats on the other side of the fence too. He can't handle himself. So the hopefully he will not go bark at the fence now. So now I've totally lost my train of thought because of dogs and turkeys.
Well, I will just say that there is, like, you could take a million classes on writing, online classes, in-person classes, whatever. There is no replacement for writing books and completing them over and over and over again. No amount of classes could ever give you the experience and the knowledge that you need, that you get from just writing and finishing your book over and over again. And not the same book, because I fell into that a little bit early in my career. There was a book I really wanted to sell, and I wrote it a bunch of different ways. I submitted it to a bunch of different things. And that is not the same experience as starting a new book and finishing that book, starting a new book and finishing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, like, so while I was waiting to hear back on that first book that I submitted, I was in slush for like 7 months, and then I worked back and forth with the editor for like another year after that, almost. No, another 10 months after that. So like back and forth, like 3 rounds of revisions, and eventually sold the book. But that was 20 months or so altogether, I guess. No, yeah, so I undersold that. It was, anyway, whatever. It doesn't matter. It was 20 months altogether from submission to sale. And in that time, I wrote like 13 manuscripts. And so if there was any kind of legend about me out there in the world that I have run across, it's that the reason that I look like a fast writer is that it is a well-known fact that I wrote 13 books while I waited. So obviously what I did was publish those books quickly early in my career. And that is not true because they were all terrible. But and so I rewrote 2 of them and sold them after rewriting them extensively, then decided that was more work than I wanted to put into things. But basically, I think that all that writing that I did in between those revision rounds is why I was able to revise and sell. Because while I sold my first book, I gave myself more experience. And I think had I not been doing that, and had I not been writing, and these books that are, again, like, in my opinion, unpublishable as they, in the form that they were in when I finished with them, like, it didn't matter. Like, that was experience, like with the shape of a book, with how I wrote a book, with where I made mistakes, with where I would get bored. And like, I learned how I felt at certain points in a book, and where I wanted to quit and where I had to like kind of keep pushing. And so when I finally did get revisions, I had a much better idea of the way that first book was put together and how to kind of go about revising it. So it's like, it is, for me, that experience was absolutely the best teacher. And even though I never did anything with those books, I do believe that they are why I got published.
Yeah, there's a lot of experience or writing that you do that you'll never get like a specific gratification from. Like, you're not going to sell necessarily every book, but that doesn't mean that book was a waste. No. I spent a lot of time writing and submitting over and over in those early years, and just thought, like, the more I can write, the more I can submit, the more chances I have. And some of those sold and some of those didn't. And it was the experience of all of that writing. And that continues throughout your writing career.
Oh, absolutely.
The thing is, so we come from the point of view of people who didn't just want to write a book and publish a book. We both wanted a career writing books. Like, my idol is Nora Roberts. I want to write 1 million books for the rest of my life. Like, that is my goal. So you kind of have to think about your goal a little bit. If your goal is just that you want one day to write one book and publish one book, that is obviously totally acceptable, but our advice might not apply because we're coming from a different perspective.
We're career commercial writers, so it's like there's always going to be a long-term view being taken, and there's a price tag attached to everything. So I'm going to look a little bit at our questions here. So Annabeth says, I agree with that. And this was back when we were talking about platform. Time is finite. Time is a finite resource. Spend early time on the craft of writing and the story, and platform will come organically over time as you grow. And I completely agree with that. So I wanted to make sure that I read it. And Luann says, when you both write, do you come up with ideas as you write or have it mostly in your head? And she said, I'm so impressed with your details.
I mean, it sort of depends. I'm not a plotter, so I do not have a clear-cut vision. Obviously, with romance or with romantic suspense in particular, like I know that the mystery has to be solved and that they have to get together. So, like, there is the knowledge of what has to happen, and oftentimes I kind of have an idea of what ending I'm going for, but I really don't have a lot of specific ideas because I consider myself a character-driven author.
Yeah.
So I make choices as I get to know the characters, and they sort of start to make sense to me. So there's not a lot of pre-planning going on. That doesn't work for my thought process and writing process.
I'm the same. I would say that, like, in romance particularly, that is true for me. Like, I'm fully character driven, so it's like I may think that I know some things, but like if I get going, I was actually just talking to my editor this morning about edits on my most recent cowboy book that I did, and we were kind of talking about my heroine's conflict, which is what she's having me kind of look at and strengthen. And I was like, I mean, I completely agree with you. Like, I was writing kind of down, and I was like, part of the problem is I didn't commit because I was writing it down, and I was like, oh, I don't like this, but this feels like what she wants to do. And I was like, I'm the last person to say that, like, my characters tell me what to do. But there are those times where you're writing and you're like, this is the only thing, and I don't really want to do it. Like, but it's right. And like, then I always think, especially when it's hard or like emotionally thorny, turning away from it is pulling a punch. So I'll sit there like, I don't really want this. And then like, but yeah, so I would say that like, I like to have some things planned out, but I also want to be open to those moments where you're like, all the things that I've put together make more sense with this other choice here for the character. And I have to like,
yeah, I think if I know exactly what's going to happen, I get really bored.
yeah.
And I don't want to write it. When I know exactly what's going to happen, I waste so much time and procrastinate and don't want to finish. Like, I would rather be surprised, and I let my characters kind of take the lead, in that they become three-dimensional people to me. So it's thinking about what they would do. It's not so much them telling me what they would do. It's like thinking about what this type of person would do. And I actually, with my intrigues in particular, I do sit there when I get stuck, I start plotting out what the next chapters will be.
Yeah, I do that too.
And 9 times out of 10, it changes. Like, very rarely is that actually what happens, but that gets me past the block. And then it's like, again, I'm listening to the characters and what the story needs. But you can't, like, if you do plot, I think you can't be afraid to change it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because that is the biggest thing that I will say is that when people ask like what my process is, I have the hardest time answering that question, because especially if I've written 2 books back to back that were completely different. Like, the way that they came together was completely different. And so for me, the biggest and best thing that I've learned over writing, professionally for 10 years is to be willing to go with what is working. And if it's plotting, great, do it. But if the book is not getting done through plotting, then that may not be the right route to take with that book. It may be best to just sit down and start writing and see what happens. And for me, like my women's fictions, because I'm balancing 4 different character arcs that are not tracking together in quite the same way that a romance arc does, but they do need to be on the same theme, I do plot more and I plot differently, but I'm still an emotional plotter. Like, I plot emotional arc. I don't plot like physical activity, because there's not much in my books, let's be real. plot light. Yeah, so it's like I have to do something different for a different genre that I write. So it's like you just kind of have to, honestly, the biggest and best thing I can say is like a good dose of self-awareness and figuring out how your own brain works so that you can manipulate yourself is the best thing that a professional writer can do. It's like,
you only learn that for doing it.
yeah,
Like you can't learn that from a class. You can't learn that from reading a book. You can only learn
yeah,
from doing it.
what your personal carrot is that like you can hold out in front of yourself. Dun, 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 dun. So Jacqueline says, if you write a series, how do you keep track of the details?
Well, first, you make a lot of mistakes where you don't keep track of details.
That's the truest thing. And then
I'd like to say that I learned my lesson, and I do a little bit. I have started better keeping. I keep a notebook where mostly I just keep track of like hair color and eye color.
yeah.
Or maybe if there's a time, it's like there's an overlap.
There's a timeline issue,
yeah.
like, and what I will say is much like everything else in my life, I for like 2 years was very organized with Gold Valley and like had this fantastic binder that was like the embodiment of every mistake I made in like Silver Creek and Copper Ridge. Like it all came together in this like beautiful like Bible with grids and like character description and synopses, and that all fell apart like 2 years ago. So
I think the hard part for us being kind of fast writers is that I don't want to sit down and write down the notes or put the notes anywhere. I just want to finish writing the book. So I'm not going to sit there and be like, okay, I said he has green eyes. I'm going to go write this in my Bible or type this in my...
Yeah, so then I fail myself in it.
Right. Now, if you can do that, if you're that organized soul,
do it.
God, do it. Like, it will save your bacon.
Yes, absolutely. I recommend that you do it. But I have
very difficult.
Very hard off my organization train, and I'm just kind of like, can't the copy editor tell me if I'm wrong? And you know what? Sometimes they don't.
You can go search for in the document. Like I can go search for hair, the word hair, and I will find out what color hair there is.
It's true.
And sometimes you'll make a mistake. And the only people who notice are really hardcore readers, and they will send you an email and tell you that you made a mistake, and all you can do is say,
I used to say, like, so, and I have to say I have not had this happen for a while, so now I'm going to have to, like, knock on wood. But, like, every time a book would come out, I would get an email, and it would be like, on this page, so-and-so has blue eyes, but then on this page, she has brown eyes. And I'd be like, okay, that's the email I'll be getting for this book. And then for the next 3 weeks, I would get 100 emails about the eye color change from different people. So I'm always like, well, that'll be this book's mistake that I'll be getting. Well, on this page, you said this, but on this page, I'm like, all right, well, here we go. So it's like, anyway, so we always know when there's a mistake.
We're human. People are human.
Yeah.
When you're human, you'll make a mistake. It's not the world.
Yeah, basically, I mean, you're just not going to be perfect. And like a million people read the books and you do your best to not have mistakes, but you just will. So, and that's like, so I was going to say something, Ray, organization. And I was just going to say, like, to follow on with that, like, you and I like to write. We're not researchers. We're not big, like, plotters. Like, there are a lot of people that I think there's, like, there's a lot of different kinds of writers, but there's two, like, very primary different kinds of writers that are, like, some are incredibly, like, rooted in that process of research and planning. And for them, the most fun part is, like, researching a strange job or a setting or something like that, or like building their like literal bulletin board, which like I do bulletin boards sometimes for books and stuff. Like I do those things sometimes, but they're not, I spend like a day on them. I don't have any patience, like a Pinterest board or like a playlist or whatever, like, but really I don't have any patience for planning. I just want to do it. And so I'm very, very goal oriented, and I am not as process driven as some people are. Like, I'm like, I don't like, for me, the process is fraught. Like, I wouldn't say that it's always enjoyable as much as it is obsessive.
Yeah. And
like,
again,
I need to make progress.
It goes to self-awareness. Like, you have to kind of notice what kind of person you are, what kind of writer you are. Because I have no patience for research. I hate when I have to stop and Google something. It drives me insane. Like, I don't want to spend time finding out about their job. Like, and I think this kind of comes from us being character driven. Like, we care about the people, not the trappings. That's just one way to be.
Yeah.
Just And I think you're always going to find your writer friends and the people that are kind of more like you,
It's true.
because you'll make sense to each other. So like we can kind of only give one opinion on some things because
Yeah.
we are naturally drawn to people who have that same opinion. So this, I guess that's my way of saying like this all comes down to like this is how we feel about it,
Yeah.
um,
And
and you might feel
also,
differently.
because I think it's good to know, like, because especially people who like give classes on, like, it's very, very hard for me to give craft classes. I've done it, but the thing is, I'm an instinct driven writer. So while I can give a class on craft, it takes me 1,000 years to like write it because distilling what is for me very like feelings led is
Yeah,
very, very difficult to do. So a lot of the classes that you can take on writing are based on grids and forms and bulletin boards and mood boards and like, because those are the people that are more able to teach it. They have this very like fixed process. And so I think if you think that that's what you have to do and that's the level of organization you have, you'd be like, but I don't enjoy any of this. And like, that's kind of how I felt going to any kind of, like, I remember my mom paid for me to go to like a writer's conference when I was like 13. I was homeschooled. So like I did weird stuff. So I went to like a writer's conference with all adults when I was like 12 or 13. And like the way that people talked about books and like taking years to do it and all this stuff just made me like feel dead inside. And I was like, if I thought about writing that way, I would never do it. Like no one talked about story. Everybody talked about process. And that is not something that resonates with me. And it's fine if it does, but I think if you think that you have to do things in this particular way, it can be really defeating. So,
yeah.
yeah,
I
that's,
When I was in high school and I was trying to write a novel, I would get every like how to writing book in the world, and they all like made me want to quit like halfway through the book, halfway through the, like because it was like forms and like fill this out, and I'm like I don't, that's not what I care about. And it wasn't until I read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott that I finally read a writing book that like made sense to me, because it was all about getting your, as she calls it, a shitty first draft down, and it was all about like actually writing the story, not these grids and graphs and things. That didn't make sense to me. So I think if you're finding whatever it is and somebody's telling you like this is how you write a book and it doesn't make sense to you, that's because it's not the thing that works for you.
yes, yeah.
That being said, because I have to yell this at my kids all the time as they're learning different ways to do stuff, you should always try something first, because it might actually work for you even though you think it doesn't. Like part of writing and writing a lot is trying new things and giving them a chance before you decide that that's not for you.
Well, I think being flexible in general, which might answer some more questions before I go into this because, whoo, that'll take time. So Luann says, when your book gets edited, do they edit your ideas? And story. So yes, I mean, content, one of the things that I think is like different about being a published author versus being an aspiring author, and I catch myself doing this too, you kind of forget what things you needed to know when you weren't published. Like you're like, for me, I'm 10 years in the business as a published author. And so it's easy for me to like, I'll go on the Harlequin Connection and give advice. And you go, yeah, published authors get rejected too. That's 100% true. We do. But also a lot of times we're getting rejected at the idea stage. So I'm not going to send a book to my existing publisher wherein the idea has not been approved. And that is much more like with my presents, let's say, I don't really have to get an idea approved. I can do whatever I want. Like I don't write a synopsis or anything. I just hand the book into my editor and go, have fun. And she like, I've gotten to the point where they let me do that. With my cowboy books, I essentially, I do send in a proposal, but I do not have a lot of like input from the publisher on, they essentially let me go do what I want. With my women's fiction, I have to write a very, very detailed outline. They're trade books. They cost more. It's a different market. Like we have to have multiple people approve an idea. But I'm not writing a whole book only to find out that the idea is not going to be accepted. Not with the publisher I am specifically writing for.
And the thing is, editors are different. Editors are people too. So your experience with different editors is going to be different. So it's not like if you are pre-published, that is not what you should really be worrying about yet. Not that you can't like pre-worry about stuff, but I mean, like, it's just, you don't know until you're in that publishing situation with that editor, with that
Yeah.
line, or is it single title category? Like there's so many
Yeah.
outside forces. Like that's really just like it depends. That's an it depends
Yeah.
answer.
I mean, it's definitely like, even, like today when I chatted with my editor, it's like, no, we're not changing the story. But there were things that needed to change, and it's kind of, but then I've also worked with editors who were heavier handed than the one that I currently work with. I've worked with editors who like to take it down to a line edit stage, and they're really like, editing your words, and like they have a lot of opinions about how things are put together. My current editor has a lot of thoughts on story, but she doesn't tend to touch, anything deeper than that. And sometimes she has edits, sometimes she doesn't. She's not the kind of editor to give them just because she's an editor. Um, and I've worked with so many editors. It's like I've run the gamut on like heavy, light, whether or not they were the kind of editor that were totally happy for you to ignore them. I had an editor that I worked with once, and she was great. I really like her a lot. She did not like my book, but I didn't do what she asked, and she was okay with that. Like, and that's a very particular personality type too, that she was very comfortable being like, well, I hate this and I think it's terrible. But when I was like, well, I don't want to change it, she was like, well, okay, like, well, what do you want to do? Like, let's figure out like a workaround. So it's like, it so depends on, like, every conversation is on the table.
Yeah.
In publishing, in my experience, any and all weird things can happen to you. So like, it's like you can have an editor. Yeah, it depends. So you can have the same one editor that says, I love this book, and nothing changes. And the second book you send in, they go, I hate this, like burn it to the ground, rewrite the entire thing. So it's like, you never know.
Yeah.
And how they respond to your response depends on them. So Kareem says, do you think it's a good idea to write 5 or 6 chapters before submitting the first 3 so you'll want to finish?
So I always think you should finish the book.
I agree.
Period. You should just finish it. Even if you don't know it's going to sell, you should finish it. If you are, I hate this is going to sound meaner than I mean it to sound, but if you are going to take up the editor's time to read the 3 chapters, then you should have the dedication to that book and the belief in that book to finish it. So if you were like, I'm just going to see if these 3 chapters work, like that's not the way. Once you're published, then you're going to start working on proposal, which is 3 chapters and a synopsis, typically speaking. And that's the time you can kind of throw stuff out. But if you are really serious about wanting to get published, the best thing you can do for yourself is to finish the book. Now, if you turn in those first 3 chapters like a little bit before you finish the book, but you know you're going to finish the book and probably before they get back to you, like that's okay. But your intent should be always to finish the book.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm such a rule follower that like I fully had my book finished before I sent it in, because that's what it said to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like now there are a lot of pitch opportunities that open up where they are happy for you to pitch a book that is not finished. And I understand that those things happen now. And that was not a thing that was like well, like, or the contest that I did, it was okay to write a chapter for that contest and send it in. So it's like, there are absolutely going to be situations where you don't have to have the book finished to pitch it. You don't have to have the book finished to send it in. But I would advise strongly that you do, because, really another thing is, it's such an interesting thing to like have been, and I feel like 1,000 years old in publishing years. It's like to have watched people sell quite quickly and easily, sometimes on a partial or like something that they then like I don't know, it's like you always have to finish. That's just, this entire job is learning to finish things even if you're bored with it, because like one of the like double-edged swords about being a published author is that like often I know what I'm going to write for the next year, and I've committed to that on some level. Like I've either set up the characters, or we've all signed on to like the next women's fiction I'm going to write or whatever. Like I can't really change my mind. So to have had the practice to like force myself to finish no matter what's going on and no matter what I feel is something I've never regretted, because like this entire career is having to finish books.
Yeah.
So
and
it's like,
don't sell the book. It doesn't matter, because it's still experience and it's still good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Which has been, my experience totally. I'm trying to make sure that I don't miss questions.
Okay, I have a question on mine.
Oh, okay.
Um, so, but I lost it.
It's okay. We can pause and listen to my wind chimes for a moment.
Okay, so Deanna said, what is one thing you can do to get the story started? For me, it's being character driven. It's getting to know the characters, like
Yeah.
getting to know who my hero and heroine are. That's the thing that always starts it, or maybe a what if question. But I have to know who the characters are, and that's for some people that's doing the graph of like what's their eye color and what's their hair color and what's their motivation and what's the conflict going to be. And for some people, it's just Pinterest boards and soundtracks, whatever. But
Yeah. And I would say like that is one thing. Like I also had coffee with Megan earlier today, not live on anything. We just chatted. And I was telling her, I'm quite bored with my next presents idea. I set it up already. It's a book that I know I'm going to write. See, and this is what happens, right? So I'm always really excited when I have a presents coming up and I don't know what it's going to be. It's unconnected to anything. I can do whatever I want. But I do know what I'm doing next. And I was like, I'm not excited. And it's like the reason I always throw that out there, like, with you guys, like when I don't know, is that it's like, well, what would make you excited about it? Like there has to be a twist to the setup, something. Like if I'm bored before I start, then I know I'm missing something. And so I've learned not to just jump in. It's like there's I do and then when I have that scene, that moment, then it's like, and then sometimes, well, again, this is the thing with like, I try to approach it as like, it's a fluid thing. It's going to be different. Like sometimes I have to start writing in order to know if I even can start it. Like you just have to start.
You just start. It's just like walking. You put one foot in the front of the other. You put one word in front of the other. Like you just have to do it. And maybe it sucks. Maybe it doesn't make sense. Who cares? Like you're doing it, and you can fix that later.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like that was everything about finishing for me. I didn't worry about my sentences. I didn't worry about if it made sense. It was just you're putting one foot in front of the other. And when it's done in a complete package, then you can start figuring out the problems with it and fixing those problems. But you can't fix problems that don't exist yet.
Yeah, absolutely. As Dirk Bentley would say, it's only a mountain.
It is only a mountain.
I just realized that I lost my row marker. I don't even know how long ago. So I've just been sitting here knitting this and I have no idea like how many. I thought I was like on the same row. Anyway, whatever.
The other question on my page was, when you start a story, do you know which people are going to show up in your story?
I mean, like in a series that is like all kind of tightly connected, yeah. But if like, well, I mean, I will say, like, I was writing this current one and my hero had a sister and I didn't necessarily envision her as a heroine, but then suddenly, like, as she was talking to the hero, it became clear she had a deadbeat boyfriend who she clearly needs to, like, realize is not as good as whatever cowboy I will throw her at. And so sometimes, like, I have things like that happen. Like, I end up with surprise heroes or heroines for future books.
Yeah, the hero and heroine is never a surprise.
No.
Sometimes a side character will be a bigger reveal than I anticipated, or I'll just invent one on the spot. That happens a lot for me in my intrigues because I don't always know who the bad guy is going to be, and so I just start throwing random people in there. But definitely always know like the main players and that they're going to be important.
Yeah, for sure. So another question that we have on here is, do you have an idea in which specific countries you sell books? Yeah, actually, I mean, Harlequin has a great database and that always pops up on our statements and stuff. And that's always really fun to see. We get like neat, I mean, presents particularly. My cowboy books, you will find in a few countries that are not the United States, but not very many. Not compared to the presents, which basically are everywhere, and that's kind of a vastly incredible readership that is so like, yeah, it like blows my mind. Like you get a manga edition in the mail from Japan, and it's got like artwork and stuff, and it's just crazy. So yeah, we get copies of the books, and like we, so yeah, like we. Oh, you have them with you. I just have barking dogs.
This is one of my super romances in Indonesia. So it looks like that. I get like French ones and intrigue, just yeah. So Harlequin is the king of the castle when it comes to books being in foreign countries. I don't know that some of my other publishers would make that as clear where
Yeah.
I'm sold.
Well, and in fairness to a lot, like one of the things about Harlequin / Harper Collins is that the the foreign like publishers are them still.
Yeah.
So like if I was going to like my books that were with Penguin, they would be selling them to a foreign publisher, so I'd be getting like separate statements and a separate like thing. So it would just be handled really differently. Whereas like with Harlequin, it's just like it's very like
It's
well
Harlequin France, Harlequin Spain,
yeah,
Harlequin.
exactly. And Jacqueline says in Belgium, cowboy books, yay. So Luann says, do you pass your book to your writer friends before editing or advice from friends? Yeah, we do actually. I mean, we share books with each other.
So I will say that I very early in my career tried to find critique partners, and that did not always work out either because I was too fast, or we just didn't have this same like if you kind of have to be on the same wavelength for a lot of things. And you don't want to just find some random person to read your stuff and tell you stuff and then take everything they say at face value or ignore everything they say either. So you kind of have to find the right friends or
Yeah.
or whatever for that. Like it feels comfortable. The suggestions they're making work for you. It's not a tear down.
And I would say like for us, because we do have editors and stuff, it's like a lot of it is that it's really helpful for your writer friends to know what you're working on so that when you go, well, I'm having this problem with this and I don't know what I think about that, they know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and we're not like sitting here like editing each other's work.
No, not at all. Like, and even like really, it's very, very rare that one of us will be like, I don't really like what you did there. Like, I don't understand that. Like, it's very unusual. And typically we're only really giving, I mean, cause we don't usually feel that way, I don't think, but also like, I think mostly we're happy to leave like the serious editing up to the editor. But if one of us is like, I'm really stuck or like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Right.
Then it's
like, does this work? Did that make sense to
yeah.
you? Like, it's more of a reassurance thing, or like, is that gut feeling that I don't like this because I shouldn't like it, or just like my own paranoia?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's more of a I don't know, like not comfort group or support group, but it shouldn't be like I don't think you should just be trusting any random person to like edit your story.
I agree.
That's the point I'm trying to make. But we have a circle of trust, and it's more about if we have specific problems.
Yeah.
We're still into it at this point. It was much different for me in the beginning, trying to find someone to share work with and kind of get an opinion on. So you really have to be comfortable with the people that you're doing that with and really trust them. And not like that they're like maliciously trying to hurt you, but just trust their opinion, trust their taste, trust that they're giving you good advice.
Yeah, completely. And so April also asked like if we do or like if you should do dual or single POV, and I would say that just like squarely depends on what you're writing. In contemporary romance that is in third person, you're not going to find very many single POVs. Good night, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
So you're not going to find very many single POV stories. That means point of view. If you don't know, you like in first person. I think that's more common. But if you're writing in third, not really.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you read a lot in the genre that you want to write, you're going to you just pay attention to what you see a lot. Now, there are exceptions. Like Nora Roberts is Nora Roberts and kind of gets to do whatever she wants. There are like those tentpole authors that kind of get to do like what they want to do, and it might be different than what everyone else is doing. But like if you're reading a lot, like if you want to write for a particular Harlequin line, like I would really recommend reading a lot of them, and you'll see a pattern of how they do the technical things. Like obviously every writer is different in how they write and how they sound and the kind of characters and whatnot. But like you're going to see some of the technical ways that they develop a story repeat itself because that is what's considered the norm.
Yeah, and that is what is kind of a reader preference. Like you'll see, like if something is mainstream, there's a reason for that. It's because it's generally what works.
Yeah.
So Luann says, is it a group of editors? No, I have been in situations where multiple editors might have a read of something. Like again, if you have not sold to a publisher yet, it tends to be that like all the editors have a read before something is bought, or a group of editors, but because there are editorial teams working for the different Harlequin lines, working at different imprints at different publishing houses. And in that scenario, you may have like another person's opinion thrown in there. But in general, no. I work with the senior editor of the Presents line. Nicole works with the senior editor of the Intrigue line, and so I mean, very easily the buck stops with them anyway. So it's like it's just their opinions, and that is true. My Presents editor also edits my cowboy books, and so it's just her and me. And we were there are scenarios wherein multiple editors will read something, like if you're trying to make something fit multiple markets, and these are unusual scenarios. But I was just kind of talking to my editor about this, and she was like, but the problem with that is like once you are adding too many opinions, that becomes its own whole thing. Because when you're contorting to try and please too many people, that creates its own barriers. So like generally speaking, it's you and your one editor.
Plus, you'll have a copy editor or proofreader. Like you'll have
Yeah,
these
yeah, that's true.
editors on the other side of it, but they don't get to tell you about like your
they are strictly correcting grammar, saying things like her eyes were blue on this page, but they're green on this page, so pick one. Like that's what a copy editor does, and then then a proofreader will read after, and they might ask questions. Like they might say, what did you mean here or whatever, but it's different than, your primary editor is the person you're like working on story with. Like they're going, I'm confused by this. I don't like this character. I don't understand why she did that. Like this, and you're going, oh, okay, well this is, and then you kind of come to a consensus on how you want to fix that, or you just go off and do it. But like, they're the people that you work on story with, and who I would say you're more,
you have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
You have with a copy editor.
Yeah, I don't know any of the people that copy edit my books. We don't go back and forth on things. My editor is my contact at the publisher. Everything that I do goes through that editor first, and you get to know each other. I mean, that's the person that you work with, and they're reading your books. So it's like that's the kind of your primary relationship at a publisher is your editor.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this, and then if you guys have any more questions, because I know Nicole will have a lot to say on this topic. If you guys have any more questions, keep putting them in there. But we were talking earlier about flexibility and process, and how I think that is one of the most valuable things that an author can have and do. And the other thing that I would add to that is flexibility. And again, speaking in terms of a long-term, like mindset commercial writer, flexibility in terms of what you're willing to write. Because I do not know a single person who has been in this business for a number of years who has not had to address that at some point.
Yeah, I think so. For me personally, I love to write. I love romance novels in particular. That's what I wanted to be published in. But I have met a lot of people who are like, oh, I could only write this one type of romance or this one type of character, this one type of thing. And I think the more you shut yourself off to saying what you can't do, the more you kind of dim that creativity. And there's two aspects to this. There's the business aspect of where you have to sell a book that, or if you want to sell a book, it has to be somewhat marketable. It has to fit into a market. It has to fit into a line. It has to fit into something. But there's also this sort of creativity aspect. I did not set out in my career to write romantic suspense. It is now like 90% of what I write. But because of the way my career kind of twisted and turned, like that became an opportunity for me to write romantic suspense. And I liked reading it and it fit and it works and I'm so glad I did it. But I never set out with that like goal in mind.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, there's a lot of examples of that in my career where I never set out to do that thing, but that's the opportunity that arose in order for me to continue to be a published author.
Yes.
And I think doing the thing that I was reticent about or thought I couldn't do has been like the best thing for my creativity because it forces you to do some stuff out of your comfort zone. And that's
Yep.
where some of the best stuff happens, as trite as that
I
is.
agree with that completely because I come from a place where like I could have self-limited for a very long time. And this is another one of those things. It's those near misses that I'm always kind of grateful for, where it's like, and this sounds terrible, but I don't mean it that way because I'm not like, it's just like for me personally, like I started wanting to do single title before 50 Shades came out. So there was nothing I could do as somebody who wrote billionaires. Like that nobody was interested in that. Like you didn't write like Harlequin presents head billionaires and princes, and there was not a place for that in the contemporary market at the time. Um, and I was like, well, I don't know what I would do. And people were always like, well, you should write small town romance. And I was like, I live in a small town. I don't really want to write small town romance. Like it's not appealing to me. What I like about presents is that it's so different from my daily life. So I was very, very hesitant to try it. And then when I did, what I found was that I loved it. And so I kept saying like, no, I don't want to do it. No, that won't work for me. No, I'm not going to like it. And then I would totally, if I had like stuck to that, I would never have written a cowboy book, you know, and that has become the larger part of my career is cowboys. And then women's fiction was honestly kind of the same. I was like, I don't know, like I do romance, and I love it. I love writing it. And so every opportunity I've had to step somewhere outside of my comfort zone, whether it led to something or not, like I also wrote a biker book, and you're not going to see me like write 100 more of those, but like it was beneficial. There were things that I learned through the process. There were things that I um, enjoyed, and it gave me at least like it was totally different than anything I'd ever written before. It's totally different than anything I've written since, and it was creatively worthwhile. And I think as much as I, you know, like we've talked, like we're practical, so like as much as I am motivated by getting paid for what I do, like I love to write, so I also want to challenge myself and like now there's a weed eater. I don't know. I also want to challenge myself and grow and all of that. So that is, you know, that flexibility and that willingness to like learn and experiment. And I think the problem becomes when you've been writing for a while is that you try something new and you feel new again. And that is disconcerting. And I hate it every single time. But it's like, you know, you just have to like, yeah, I don't know. So it's like, I think that that willingness to jump in and like try something different is like only ever beneficial. And it's good to don't put yourself in unnecessary boxes. You're a creative and there is a vast freedom in that. And like, we should be like, you should like explore that rather than being like, no, this is what I do and this is who I am.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, so from the business standpoint, like becoming a published author is a it's a career path. But even if you only do it once, you're getting paid for a service, so it's a job. And if you were thinking about any normal career that you might have, like teaching or like law enforcement, anything like that, it usually has steps. It has like you so much experience, so much education equals this much money. And writing isn't like that. You kind of have to make your own steps, but you still have to think about it in that way. Like if you were in a teaching career and you went and got your master's degree, like that's a step you could take. If you're writing and you're going to write something different and you're going to learn how to do something new and challenge yourself, it's sort of the same process. So if you've had a career in something else, you kind of have to apply some of the same um, thought processes to it in a place that's not really comfortable to do that because it is artistic and it is creative.
Yeah. Well, I just always think like it's such a like, yeah, it's a creative pursuit. Like at the end of the day, as much as I'm an advocate of structure, and I am, as much as I'm an advocate of like being practical, and I am, like you are creative and you are engaging in an art. And so it's always a tightrope walk between the practical and the kind of like fanciful. And I think that that's a gift because, yeah, we are able to like create worlds, and that's kind of an amazing thing. So, it's very important to have that kind of grounding perspective of like, this is the one foot in front of the other. Dirk Bentley, it was only a mountain, just one step after the other and you've climbed the mountain. Like, you have to have that kind of grim grit, but also remember that you are creating fiction, and that is a bright and like wonderful kind of magical thing. So I think it's always about carrying those two things kind of equally inside of you, because you don't want to lose the, like, I mean, it's kind of a magical thing to get to write books. You don't really want to forget that you're doing a magical, neat thing.
Yeah.
But that's where, like, yeah, staying creatively fresh. And that's just, another thing to kind of touch on is what has been asked a lot is, like, how do you write when things are really tough? And I do think that it is kind of clinging to that, like, throwing yourself into the creative aspect of it, and while also keeping that long-term perspective. So Luann says, do you write every day, a certain time of day, and how many hours? I don't write every day because it's like a job. So I do take weekends off typically, but unless I don't, because it depends. Like, I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, I'm very, very disciplined. I actually brought my planner out here, but I won't show you. Like, I'm very, very disciplined. I write a certain number of words a day, tailored around my deadline. I'm pretty brutal on myself. I expect for myself to like hit my goals. And then I will do it and spend like days doing nothing. But I kind of have learned that I like doing that. Like, when I'm working on a book, I almost prefer working every day and not taking a break, because then it doesn't break the flow. But then I might take a week off when I'm done and like bake and lay around and not do anything, like knit. So it just really, like, so I would say that, like, as a general rule, I keep office hours. Like, I'm working, but like it's a work day today and I'm doing this. So like, I don't write solidly for the entire day. Ever.
I definitely try to write every day when I'm in the middle of a book. And I write most days. I find that the best way to keep motivated. Now, some days that's a big word count, and some days it's like a sentence. But like, to keep myself grounded in the work, I do like to write every day. I don't, like, I probably won't write on Easter, but like 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna write every day. My schedule is not very situated because my husband's work schedule and my kids are younger. So I can't just go in a room for a couple hours a day, unless all the stars align. So my writing every day is very much like dependent on other people. But that works for me. That's always been the case for me. So it's just like, I know, like, this day so and so is going to be home, or this day so and so is not going to be home, and I can write at this point in time. And I just am very, whenever I can do it, I do it.
Yeah.
And I enjoy doing it. So like, it's not hard for me to motivate myself unless I'm like at a part that I'm struggling with, or like I said, if I know exactly what's going to happen, then I'm kind of bored and procrastinate. But
Yeah.
but
I
my
used to do that. Like, this ties back into what I said earlier. Like, I remember very clearly being like, I have 3 kids in diapers and like nothing else to be doing other than writing. And I'm like, now that my husband is a stay-at-home dad and I can write every day to my heart's content, unless, I mean, there's always like weird schedule stuff. But it's like more or less like this time of the day is blocked out for me, even with the kids home from school. And I'm like, and the more time like that I have, the more I'm like, but what if I laid around? So it's like, sometimes that like extra time is not particularly helpful to productivity, because I remember when it was more like when my kids were little and it was like, okay, I have 2 hours before my husband goes to work, or a couple hours before I go to bed, and I would make sure that I got everything done. Yeah. So definitely, like, sometimes more time is not really a gift. I mean, you can definitely feel more leisurely, which is nice, but I wouldn't say that I'm like scads more productive.
I think having a time in your life where you don't have the time and you're shoving it in gives you a really good perspective for when you do have a little bit more
I
time.
agree.
Um, but at the end of the day, when you have a goal, and for romance, if you have a specific publisher in mind, you can get a word count. You know how many words that you have to write in your story. You can decide how long you want that to take you, and you can divide it up about which days you want to work and say like, okay, on these 5 days a week, I'm going to write 1,000 words, and you can get it done in a certain period of time. Like, I am so not mathematical at all, but when it comes to actually getting my work done, it's all about the word count, and
Yep,
that is
me
how
too.
I think about everything and space everything. And it's like, okay, I have to get this many words today,
Yep.
and I have to get that all accomplished by the end of this month or whatever. And that is my goal, and that is what I stick to. And like Macy said, I'm very hard on myself too. Like, I keep myself to those goals. I don't often um, let myself slide on
Yeah,
those.
I
Or
will.
you might have a bad day too and say I didn't get my 1,000 words, which means I have to do 2,000 words tomorrow because
Yeah,
not every day is going to be perfect.
this is another thing that I said recently in the Harlequin connection, which was just like, you can add, like, I absolutely, actually, here's my planner. So these 500 word chunks are, I'm going to write this many chunks of 500 words on a given day. That's how that's laid out. 500 words is a good, like, focused amount of work for me. And then I take a break. Or sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just like keep going depending. But like if I'm really, really, really struggling to get in, it's like 500 words, then you can look at something. Because sometimes my attention span sucks. But you can see that on Monday the 30th, I crossed that out because I didn't do any. But the thing is, that came to collect this week where I had to do a vast amount more than I wanted to do. And it just looks gross. Like that was Wednesday because I had to finish the book. And it's like, so those days come to collect. You can like when you're as like planned out as I am, it's like great. Well, you can like lay around for a day, but like it's not necessarily being kind to future me. I spend a lot of time being angry. Future me spends a lot of time being angry at past me for laying around. But it's like, but I know it's. I always say that it's like a word budget. And so people avoid doing budgets because you don't actually want to know what your shortfall is. So I feel like oftentimes people avoid figuring out, well, how much work would I actually have to do every day to meet this goal? But what I've found is that oftentimes the answer is not as scary as you think. You're not as behind as you think. And then you don't need to spend days off going, well, how far behind am I now? You actually know if you need to redistribute the 1,000 words that you should have written today over the next week, you'll be fine. So it's like, it's actually all about, for me, that method is so totally to protect when I take time off. So it's like, if I take time off, I'm not guessing if I can. Like, I know the cost of it, or I know that I didn't have to get writing done today, or any of those things. So yeah, for me, it's all about just like knowing.
Because
Knowledge is
I mean,
power.
so for us, it's a job. I think
Yeah.
if you're pre-published, you kind of have to look at it as you are applying, like you're getting ready to do the job. So maybe you have another job or you have a lot of responsibilities at home and you can't dedicate like huge chunks
Yeah.
every day. Like that happens. But if you can figure out what's doable for you, you can make that work for you too. Maybe you only write 500 words a day.
Yeah,
Like that's
absolutely.
totally fine, especially if you have other stuff
And
going.
you could divide that into 100 words on the planner and see if like, and again, literally it's all about your own psychology, because I'm like, one reason that I like putting 500 word chunks in my planner is I like to check something off my list.
See, and that doesn't work for me at all. Like I just need to get the thing done. So I don't break it down. It's just by the end of the day I have to have X amount of words. One small way we are different.
A very small way. No, it's like it makes me it and like I said, it depends on the day. So like yesterday I actually just had to finish the book, and I rarely at the end of a book do I have trouble. Just like once I get to the black moment, I'm just going to write to the end. Like, so it's like, oh, all I have to do today is finish. And so those days I don't have to like check off and whatever. I did it just so it would looked done, because I then once I've written it down, it must be completed. But so yeah, it's like it depends on the day. But like days where I'm really unmotivated, sometimes it's like I wrote it in, so I have to check it off because I can't fail. I'm just competitive with myself, so I've committed to it. So it's like. So April says, do you use Word or Scrivener or a different program for writing? So I dictate and I use Dragon and Word. And Scrivener makes me dead inside.
I opened up Scrivener and I wanted to cry.
Yeah.
It's too much for me.
Yeah.
The thing is, I'm a very linear writer. I
Me
don't
too.
jump around. Like, I don't do things in like, I mean, I am writing beginning to end. There's no stopping. Every once in a while, if I get an idea for a future scene, I just put it in my computer notes, and it's very basic. It's like nothing. But I just use Pages, which is the
Yeah.
Mac version of Word, and then I export it to Word for my editor. But yeah, I don't use anything fancy because I don't think that way, and I think that, like we were talking about the difference between like planner people and stuff. Like, I think planner people can use Scrivener in a way that makes sense to them, but to me it was like it literally made me want to cry.
Yep, same. But I'm also like very linear, very like, so I want like my writing software to be as bare bones as possible. I don't want it to have frills. I want it to literally just be like the words, but that's the kind of writer I am too. It's like I don't want to do a lot of plotting. I don't want to do a lot of like I just want to like get it down. So for me it's like the more simple the better.
And I think that's just another great example of like nothing that one person does is going to work for
Yeah.
the other person. Like, everyone has to find their own stuff. And I always think you should try, like, we both tried Scrivener. It like
Yeah.
was immediately horrifying to us.
Yeah.
But we gave it a shot,
I got the free trial and opened it once. I was like, bah!
Yeah, I like tried to read the yeah, it was just too much for me. But I mean, I gave it a like, people talked about it. I said, okay, I'll look at it. Like, I used to do dictation. It worked for me for a little while. It doesn't work for me anymore. Like, you're not always going to have the same things work for you. If somebody is telling you have to do this one thing, like, they're wrong. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Except finish the book. That's all you actually have to do. But also that you might change. Like, at some point down the line, you might like Scrivener. Like, it could change, but if it doesn't work for you now, it doesn't have to. No one should be telling you that you have to do something, because the only thing you have to do is write and finish the book.
I think Nora said something like that as well. Like, anyone who says they like there's one way to write a book is a liar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's language, but yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. My mom might be watching this, so.
Scrivener is a hot mess. I agree, April.
I agree. Yeah, it does not work for me. Well, I think we could easily, like, my computer is at 13% and it is running this nonsense, and I'm outside with no plugs. So I think if you guys would like us to talk more about writing another time, we'll probably be back to like regularly scheduled, like non sequitur stuff on Tuesday, for fun and to like make sure that we're not boring people to death. But if you would like more of this kind of talk, let us know in the comments and we will facilitate. And we are talking about doing a workshop in the coming weeks. So we'll continue to talk. If you guys, again, if you like have interests in workshop topics, let us know in the comments. And we will see you again on Tuesday.
Yep.
All right. Bye.
Bye.